I'm Thom Dennis, CEO of Serenity and Leadership, and we're premier leadership development and culture change makers. We help businesses overcome challenges and achieve successful, lasting outcomes, whilst always putting their people at the heart of the business. Today, I'm delighted as part of our series exploring leading responsibly in a VUCA world with integrity and purpose to welcome Jim Peal. Jim is an executive coach, a trainer, and a TEDx speaker. He has a real depth of global experience that spans across the pharmaceutical, biotech technology, manufacturing, and retail industries. His areas of expertise include developing and transforming teams, integrating culture in mergers and acquisitions, architecting and managing organizational change. He served as a project manager for major change initiatives and leadership training programs in a large variety of multinational companies, and he's the founder of the Leadership Development Group. His educational background includes a BS degree in psychophysiology and a PhD from the Union Graduate School. And I, in welcoming you, Jim, what is that PhD in?
It's the psychophysiology, is the integration of mind and body. So that was a fascination that I've always had. And so I was able to integrate neuro-linguistic programming and with several different studies to create that field.
Okay, so that was your PhD as well?
That was my PhD, right.
Right,
yes.
right.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, it's such a great title.
The school that I went to was very open to each person creating their field of study. So that allowed the freedom to do that.
Brilliant. So you're dialing in from Oakland, I think, in California.
Right. Yep.
So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's go into the first question.
Okay.
You make the statement, leaders and organizations must dynamically change in order to stay competitive in today's market. Change is not a nice to have, change is imperative. Can you say a little more about that?
Sure. This reminds me of a story of an executive that I coached. And I asked him at the beginning of our session to describe his performance. And he said, straight line, I'm consistent day in and day out. And I said, oh, that's great. And so I drew a little graph and I put performance and then I put time. And I said, so you're like this straight line. He goes, yep. And I said, so what is a business required to do in order to be successful? And he goes, improve. I go, exactly right. So it has to go up. So in the context of the business going up and you're going straight across, what does that mean about your performance? And in that moment, he understood that he needs to change in order to actually lead the business and not be a lagger, somebody that's going to be dragging the performance down. And so I see that a lot where people you'll hear the phrase like, oh, that's the way we've always done it. And the organizations that are, I think, plagued by that lose the opportunity for constant innovation. And that's what this world requires us to do. If we just look over the last couple of years with the platforms utilize, Skype. And if we look at the quality of what were the features that Skype had, and then all these other ones, WebEx, Zoom, Teams, have all come onto the stage and are major players, and that they have leapfrogged each other. And so in this environment, I think that's a good example of how we need to stay on our toes and constantly be innovating and thinking outside the box. In California, they just passed a law that in the next 12 years, all automobiles have to be electric. And so we're going to see a big revolution, which I think is going to impact the entire world in terms of what it means to buy an automobile, what it means to own an automobile. And that's going to change. It's going to require the automakers really change and transform their thinking, including those, and maybe especially those that are in the leadership position today. So this is the world that we're in. It's constantly improving, constantly innovating. And what may have been a good idea yesterday, we have to constantly survey the environment so that we can keep ourselves on that leading edge.
The other day, I saw my first, what you'd call a gas station, not far from where I am, where there was no gas. It was all electric,
Wow.
just sort of 4 columns of charging gantries or whatever they're called. And it was a remarkable sort of sight. And I took a photograph. I was going to put it on Instagram. I forgot to do that, but it's like, that is the future now.
Exactly. I know I was working with the power company in Southern California years ago, and we were just at the beginning of having electric automobiles. And they were saying, we're looking in these particular neighborhoods, does our circuitry, can it handle those people that are probably going to be the first adopters of these vehicles? And so years and years ago, before the electric vehicles became as popular as they are today, they were thinking about how do we need to stay in a position where we can actually lead and supply the needs of our customer base. So I think really, thinking in terms of your consumer, your customer, and how are their needs and wants and desires going to change as we go into the future.
Yeah. So at Serenity in Leadership, we emphasize the critical importance of leaders developing themselves for the challenges that we face now and the unknown challenges that are surely coming down the line in this VUCA world. I think everybody understands VUCA these days, but volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous are the 4 words that are associated with that. What are the key challenges that you foresee and the leadership skills that are needed to deal with them?
Well, I think that, as I look at those 4 different dimensions, I think they've always been present. And I think what's changing for us is the time frame that these changes occur in. And so what it demands of leaders is to constantly survey the environment. Although we can't know everything that's going to happen, we need to have our eyes out there. We as a leader, you're kind of internally focused and externally focused to be able to kind of get a sense of what's coming to the best degree that you can, and look at how do I translate that into to optimize my work environment. So I think leaders need to create somewhat of a homeostatic environment for their employees to work in. And if we just expose them to all the changes of what's going on in the world, or even inside of your own organization, that's going to be a total distraction for them. So leaders need to be aware of what's going on out there. They need to be able to have a way to communicate that to their workforce and to create an environment. Hey, this is what's going on out there. This is what we need to focus on in order to be successful, and to help people redirect their attention. Because all these things that are going on in the world, one thing that people want to know is, like, my leader is aware of those things and is taking those into account to create this environment, to create safety for me to be able to do my job. I think that's the crux of what we need to do. And I think most leaders fail in terms of under communicating. They think that, oh, I've talked about this, but they don't recognize that the news cycle is constantly going on, and that they constantly need to be able to provide that person with a kind of like I said, a homeostatic environment that they can work in, to know that, okay, this is a safe place. We're insulated in some ways from this. Or if we're not going to be insulated, my leader has told me how we're going to handle the particular challenges that are happening. And that gives people confidence in terms of, okay, I can now focus on my work because I don't have to take care of what's going on out here.
I wonder how much there's an assumption in what you're saying around still having a sense of certainty, that leaders feel that they need to know. And yet the way that I see it, the uncertainty and the ambiguity in the VUCA word, it seems to me that more and more we just don't know what's around the corner. And I'm sure all the people who needed to prepare are completely prepared. The fact that Her Majesty the Queen died today, and on the day that we're recording this, it's like sometimes, however much you're expecting something, it's still a shock when it actually happens, particularly around death. You look at the way that Putin massed his forces on the borders with Ukraine, and people sat there in denial, saying he's never going to do it. And so we just and the results of that invasion have had such a knock-on effect across the world, at every level.
Right.
And yet it was, I've got a book. I look back there because I used to have my bookcase behind me, but it's disappeared now. But I've got that book. Essentially, it's saying it comes as a surprise, and yet, if you look at it, in retrospect, you say that was never going to be a surprise. It was bound to happen, and yet, there's so many things going on. There's so many dynamics, and we're so interdependent now, far more than we used to be. That, coming back to the question that I asked you, it's like, it feels to me like there's a demand on leaders, a greater demand than there ever has been, for them to understand what's going on inside them, and be willing to be uncertain in the way that they lead. I think I was on a podcast the other day and sort of reflecting that actually I think people, they want the truth more than they want a leader to give them a nice message, which actually the leader doesn't believe in.
Oh, right.
And so sometimes I think people actually say, look, just give me the news, even if it's desperately bad news. Tell me, because at least you're treating me like an adult, and you give me the options then to respond as opposed to react to that. So, I can't remember when you and I first worked together. It was many years ago. I remember you and I working in Buenos Aires, wasn't it?
I think so. Yes.
And just sort of with a group of people, and challenging them to say, what do you know about how aware are you of what's going on in you as you get some news, or you learn something new, something happens to you? And because I think most people go through their lives numb.
Right.
And we're kind of looking for leaders now to step up and say, I feel numb, and it makes my making decisions right now really hard. And here's the bottom line of what I know, which isn't a lot, but I'll share with you what I know.
Yeah, the word that comes to me as I'm listening to you is the word vulnerability.
Yes.
That leaders they need to be vulnerable and authentic. And so I remember one executive I was coaching, and they had a change coming up, and I said, well, how are you going to handle it? He goes, I don't know. And I said, that's exactly what you tell people. And when he gave his message, he said, we have this challenge coming up. I don't know how we're going to solve it, but I have faith in you. And I know that we're going to come together as a team and meet this challenge. And so I think that's kind of the message, that it was authentic. I don't know the answer. I don't have an answer for you. What I'm asking of is that we work as a team to solve this problem or these problems together. And that really worked. It really inspired his organization as they were moving into that challenge that he didn't have the answer for.
I think it's a paradox in a way, because this whole thing about I can't show vulnerability because then they won't follow me, or they won't respect me. All these sort of beliefs that sort of are so common. And yet, I think when leaders are prepared to show their vulnerability, everybody sighs and says, he's a human being too. That's cool.
Right.
Or she,
She,
so I think it's such a refreshing positive move, and yet it's so scary for so many people.
Right. And I think there's the what you're talking about is how do I express what's happening for me in a way that people can have a view as to what's going on for me, and also feel like I'm still leading. I'm leading by expressing my vulnerability. I'm not leading by having the answer. I'm leading by like, hey, we're in this together. We're moving through this together. It's going to require that we all step up. Whatever that challenge is that's before us, I don't have the answer. It's affecting me too.
Yeah.
And so, not too long ago when we had all the racial tensions going on here, it was really important for leaders to express this is affecting me.
Yeah.
This is part of how it touches me as a human being and shakes me up. And I think that message is really important to hear because it makes it okay for people to experience that by the example that you set as a leader.
Yeah. I'm getting all sorts of thoughts going on in the back of my mind. It wasn't Buenos Aires, it was Rio de Janeiro, wasn't it?
It was Rio.
And the book is Inevitable Surprises. And
yeah.
Towards the end, he talks about pandemics.
Yeah.
As being something that is certain to happen. And yet it took us all by surprise. And
right.
It's, well, us. I think not all people there's a group here that that's all they do all day long is plan for disasters. And
right.
they knew it was coming and they had all the contingency plans. The trouble is that all those who were responsible just threw the plans away and sort of just tried to perform on the hoof, and that's why it didn't go too well.
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag, isn't it? Because if we kind of take all that into our strategy and how we move forward and we plan for it, and then it doesn't happen, there's a huge expense of time and energy that's gone in for something that doesn't happen. And I'm sure that group that you're talking about, wherever they are around the world, are always coming up with all these things that could happen. And so if we have all those contingencies in place, are we ever going to move forward in terms of being productive? And so I think that's a tightrope that we walk in terms of, all right, I need to be aware, like we're having a heat wave now, right? So we know every August there's going to be a heat wave. Every August we should shut off our air conditioners for a certain amount of time, because otherwise we're going to have a mandatory blackout. So we all know that. They send little texts on, I got a text today, I got a text yesterday. So I'm going, okay, are they going to know whether I have my air conditioner on or not? No, but I'm going to shut mine off anyway. Yeah. And I saw in the news that when they sent the text out, they saw an immediate drop in consumer usage of electricity. So that's part of what we need to be able to listen to and know what's the appropriate response so that we can continue. We have business continuity and we're not just always planning for disaster.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying.
I suppose that, I spent a while in the Marines, and an awful lot of our life was preparing for things that we hoped would never happen. But the fact that you've prepared for it means that when something happens, even if it's not exactly that, you have a basic plan which is the foundation for you then responding to whatever happens. And so, I think, wasn't it the Boy Scouts who said, be prepared?
Yes, be prepared. Be prepared. I know for myself that sometimes when I hear what people are preparing for, it's like, what's the likelihood that will happen? Now, if you're in a war situation, that's, I think, an extreme example. What's the likelihood that tomorrow we're going to have a nuclear attack here in the Bay Area? Do I need to prepare for that? Well, it could happen. what's the likelihood? It's just in my own mind, I kind of weigh those two things, kind of go, how much energy am I going to put onto that? I do pay attention to the drought because we have a lot of evidence. We can see the water levels in the reservoirs that are down. I need to respond to that. And so I think this is part of what each leader needs to do as well, which is kind of take and weigh, okay, what are the ones that we really want to invest a contingency plan for, because there's a greater likelihood that it's going to happen. And I think this is probably how we navigate this VUCA world that we're in. It's what are the likelihoods that these things are going to happen? How opaque is my vision of what's happening? How uncertain am I? And what's the possibility of something blowing up, right? If we hear the Russians are amassing their troops, it kind of looks like a duck, smells like a duck. It's like, okay, we should probably be ready for them to attack. Our satellites are giving us information that they're getting ready to attack. Now, we may want to live in our own little bubble and kind of say, oh, that's never going to happen. We saw that on the news, like, oh, they're not going to really attack. And now we find they're attacking the nuclear power plants. So it's those are some of the things that are unimaginable that are happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So Jim, you're an NLP master trainer, neuro-linguistic programming, which means you train people to train others. That's about as elevated as you can get in the NLP world. In some circles, NLP has a kind of rarefied reputation, and in others, it's not spoken of really very positively at all. Can you speak to what NLP is and the advantages of this modality?
Right. Well, I had the opportunity. NLP was a large part of my PhD because I did have a chance to work, and I was certified by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. They were both on my PhD committee. So I have received a lot of value from their work. And I think one of the premises of NLP is that every person makes a map of reality. We have a map of reality that we create inside of ourselves. And it's a three-dimensional map. It has images, it has sounds and words, it has feelings. And so we use that internal map to guide our behavior. So for different situations, we make different kinds of maps, right? And what NLP does is it gives you the techniques and technology to be able to understand how somebody else creates their model of the world, their map of the world, and for ourselves. So I can begin to have an understanding of how you put things together in your world. That allows me several advantages. One is to help you become more successful because I can see how you have structured obstacles or things in your way, and I can ask you questions that'll help you kind of shift your perspective and have more space, more choices. One of the purposes of NLP is to provide the person more choices, and the person with more choices will have more personal power, if you will. So I can see three different ways for myself to approach a given situation. The negative reputation that NLP has received, I think, primarily comes in the field of sales. That if I know how you make your sales decisions, then I can manipulate you to buy something that you don't really want to buy. And we all know that buyer's remorse is much more harmful to your business than creating a product that really works for that person. So the integrity of the person training somebody else, and when I'm doing a sales course, I say that the fundamental starting point is that you have to believe that what you're offering that person is good for them. It's going to really enhance the quality of their life. And so what you're trying to do is to create a match so they can see if that's a choice that they want to make. So I think that's where the manipulative part of NLP has come in, is that I'm going to use it to get you to do something that you don't want to do. I think even if you were to do something that you didn't want to do, like a purchase, afterwards you're going to look at that and kind of go, I didn't really want that. That person just duped me. And so that's going to be where the reputation comes in.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. You designed an attitude measuring tool, or that's what I would call it. Can you tell us about it and how it can make a difference to leadership?
Sure, Thom. I know that was a little cheesy, but this is this evolved out of another model that I worked with, where we had a leadership triangle and a drama triangle.
Yeah.
And we had the 3 points on the triangle, 3 points on the upper and lower triangles. And I was hiking in Yosemite one day, and I go, what's another way that we could represent this that gives us more granularity in terms of what our attitudes are? Because our attitude really determines, it's one of those filters that determines how we experience the world, what we perceive, what we feel, and how we decide things. And it's something that we have a choice as to what we choose in our lives. So I was hiking, and all of a sudden this idea of a periodic table popped into my mind. And it was so ironic because I hated the periodic table when I was in high school, right? I could never really understand it. But when I got home, I just kind of sketched it out. And with one of my clients that I had been working with the triangles, at one of the all hands meetings, I presented this kind of rudimentary periodic table. And everyone chuckled. And afterwards, I was in the president's office, and I have his permission to say, Roger, I was talking with Roger, I said, I'll make a copy of that chart for everyone. And he goes, no, you won't. And I go, well, what do you mean? I'm Dr. Peal. And but he's always challenging me. And he said, well, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't really make sense. So I walked away. I was angry. We have anger here on the chart. Walked away, and what I was motivated to do was 2 years of research. So I began doing research to find out what were some of the attitudes that they experienced at work, and what was the relationship. And I began to formulate this final version where we have the 4 strengths on the side: the visionary, the activator, the coach, and the mentor, and the shadows on the other side: the victim, the adversary, the rescuer, and the skeptic. And so looking at those 2 dimensions, then what are the common attitudes in each, and putting them in a symmetrical relationship, right? So I can be defensive or inspired, I could be frustrated or engaged, I could have a hidden agenda or transparent. And so at a glance, we can see what attitude that we're in. And the big usefulness comes in when we're on the red side. So when I'm in a negative attitude, to be able to recognize, where am I? And then how can I shift over to the other side? And that's our whole purpose, because we're always going to be challenged by the events and people. And this is really a situational model to notice, if I'm not feeling my usual kind of positive self, then to identify, where am I in the red, and how can I pause for a moment to recognize that and go, okay, this is an attitude that will allow me to move forward in this given situation, and to take that in and begin to embody it. I call that the pause. So I need to be able to recognize when I'm in the red, pause for a moment, keep my mouth shut until I can get myself into a green attitude, and then I can engage, and that'll help move things forward. It's not to say that we're never going to be in the red. We're always going to have challenges. I mean, that's part of the human situation. We're going to have challenges. Our goal is to be able to recognize those, and to be able to move as quickly as possible into the green to move things forward. It's a great model for coaching, for leaders to coach other people. So you can take it out and kind of go, where do you think you are right now? Where do you want to be? And so they can not only use it for themselves, but it's a tool that they can use when working with their direct reports. So it's great. It's online. It's at checkyourtude.com. You can go and download the app on your phone. It has all the details for each of those attitudes, and it's a real useful guide that you can utilize at any time. I know a lot of parents that give the app to tell their kids to go download this app, and the kids are like, oh, this is great, I love it, it's really helping me with my relationships at school. And so it's good for all levels.
And going back to what we were speaking about earlier, if it's an aid for leaders to be more self-aware, then it can't be bad,
right?
Because that's just so fundamentally important.
I think we're always going to be challenged with going into the red. We just can't lead when we're in a red attitude. all we're going to do is create more red. And so that's the piece I think that's real essential for leaders, is to recognize, oh, I'm in the red. I need to keep my mouth shut because I'm not leading. I can't, if I speak from this place, it won't be leadership. And so to really identify visionary mode, activator, coach, or mentor. So the visionary is, as you can imagine, is about the future. Where is it we want to go? Activator is about all the steps that it's going to take to get there. The coach is being there to help people be successful in their day-to-day. And the mentor is helping people gather wisdom. So what have you learned in the last 3 projects that you worked on? What are you going to carry forward? What are you going to pass on to others? And so those are the 4 key strengths that we want to develop to also balance our leadership. So you can use this tool to see, because we'll tend to lean into one of these more than the others. So how do I balance my leadership so that I am including the visual, because I think of visionary, the visionary aspect. How am I helping to develop the path forward? Am I really there to communicate and connect with people to help them in their day-to-day? And we're building a learning organization so that we can gain from our experiences, pass those on to others, so we're not making the same mistakes over and over again.
It reminds me a little bit of some of the work that we do, which is hosting dialogues. Based on David Bohm, the quantum physicist, and his ideas of really seeing that the only way forward was for people to be able to communicate in a meaningful way. And what he encouraged, and what we try and do, is to get people, before they speak, is to in a sense notice what attitude they are carrying as a result of the last person who spoke. And one way to do that is to get them to just repeat what the last person said. Because so many people, when you're in a meeting and that, they just want to make the point, regardless of what has just gone before. So you get these very bitty, well, it's not a conversation, because it's just bits of information that are going out. But if people can be really encouraged to say, this is what they just said, and I notice what's happening to me. I notice in my body whether do I feel angry? Do I feel upset? Do I dislike that person for what they've just said? Or do I really like them? Because all of those are going to influence what I say next. And it's that level of awareness then that just really lifts the quality of what actually becomes real communication. So
yeah, I participated in one of your sessions, and it was very captivating for me, because the question that you initially posed was around discrimination.
Yes.
And I had really never thought of myself as being somebody who discriminates, but it really brought that home for me. It's like, wow, let me look at those places where I do discriminate, and what does that mean to me in my life, and how does that color everything that I see and do. And it was eye-opening for me personally, and then in our discussions, to hear all the different ways that the people experience that question for themselves. And I think it really allows you to join with, I think, is what I'm hearing. And I know that's what you focus on. It's like, I need to join with people rather than speak at them.
Yes, absolutely. And that you've created a wonderful segue into my next question.
Oh.
Because you've been involved in diversity and inclusion training for a long time, and I know you've worked with some very large organizations, helping them gain a greater understanding about this. So what is your experience of the whole scenario of people of color, their treatment by their own and by white people? And how do you see things developing in, say, I don't know, the next 5 years? I don't know, is that a reasonable time frame, given the length of time since the abolition of slavery, for instance?
Right. I think it even goes beyond that. The phrase that caught my mind is how they're treated by their own captured my attention first because I began to think about the context of racism that we live in, that most people want to deny. You know, they want to live in their bubble. People want to believe I'm a good person. I'm not a racist. You know, I know what it is. It's over there, and not really realizing how it's really influenced their thinking. And it's an automatic way that people think. So whether I'm a person of color or I'm white, we just need to get over I've already assimilated that into my system. And so internalized racism is when I take on that element against myself. So I take on the attitudes of racism against people of color, but I hold that against myself. So I see myself as, like, from when I was growing up, I felt like I wasn't as good as a white person. And that kind of seeped into my own psyche as I'm just not as good as anyone else. And I began to see other people of colors like, we're just not as good. I had internalized that thought form and was treating myself and treating other people of color that way. So I can only take responsibility for myself. I know that isn't true for everyone. I know that internalized racism, the assumption that I have is that it affects people, affects all people, and it's something that we have to deal with to be able to begin to kind of move it out there versus having it be internalized. I think for people who are not people of color, need to kind of get over it. You know, it's like to understand you are more likely to perpetuate racism if you don't acknowledge that you're part of the privileged society that will automatically perpetuate it. When I was teaching at the graduate school in psychology, we were having a really intense discussion, and one white gentleman said, "This discussion is scaring me because I'm afraid of losing my privilege," which I thought was really a bold statement to make, but it really exemplifies what it is that I'm talking about. There's a sense that I'm going to lose something. And I think that's when we know that we're starting to make progress, is when you have that fear that you're going to lose something. So that's for the people who are in the majority, whatever that is, wherever that is, whether it's men, whether it's people who are white, etc. If you start to feel like you're going to lose your privilege, then just breathe into it. We're not looking for revenge. People of color aren't looking for revenge. We just want the system to be fair. We want a balance. So I think that's what we're moving towards, is how do we create a true balance in our society where everyone has the opportunity? And that's what, you know, inclusion and equity is about. It's like, hey, I'm welcome into this company. I feel like I'm welcome here. And when I get here and I look around, I see that it's fair, that the policies, that the way that people are compensated is fair. You know, it's not like one group is better off, or when, if I look at who leads this company, I can see that there's a diversity there. So these are some of the directions I think that we're moving in. Are we hiring diverse people? Are we bringing diverse people in? Are we, when we have our calibration discussions, are we on the lookout for those kind of hidden forms of bias that might kind of permeate and people just slips in and people don't even notice it? So one example might be, well, there's just not a fit for our culture. Well, finding out, what is that? What do you mean by that? Tell me what you mean. So we can unpack that to see what's the basis of that. That's one example. Promotions, are promotions in our company equitable? We can look across all the people processes, from hiring to the job titles, to see that we are in fact bringing in diversity and giving people a chance to really rise to their very best. I think that's where we're going, and it takes a lot of hard work, and it takes getting over the assumption that it doesn't exist anymore. I know there are a lot of people who think, well, we don't even have to deal with race. It doesn't even exist here. And that is one of the signs that we're living in our own bubble.
Yeah, it's a kind of.
You can ask any person of color, does racism still exist? And I would bet that 9 times out of 10, they're going to go, oh yeah, I deal with it sometimes every day.
Yeah.
And that's another piece that I don't think people who are not in that group, they don't realize the diversity tax. It's like, I have to deal with these little comments day in and day out that erode away my energy, erode away my self-confidence. And so we need to raise our awareness, those microaggressions, we need to raise our awareness and purify our language so that we are speaking in a way that's genuinely inclusive and brings people closer to the center. That's when everyone's going to be doing their best.
Yeah. I think diversity is a word that can be bandied about, but I think one has to look at what it really means, because I mean, what I have in mind is the latest government leaders in this country. You could look at that and say that's an incredibly diverse group of people, because people of color, woman leader, and so on. But there's been quite a lot of commenting about, well, actually, they may be diverse as you look at them, but are they diverse in their mindsets? And are they diverse in the beliefs that they bring?
Right.
And there, I think they begin to fall at the fences. So I think when we talk about diversity, we've really got to see that. And that's why I think, for me, a more useful word is inclusion, because I think that, if people feel included, it means that they feel safe, that there's a level of psychological safety there. And if you feel safe, it means that you're being accepted. It means you're not being picked out because of some thing that makes you stand out, like you've lost a leg, or you're blind, or your color is not the same as most other people around you. So I think I don't know whether you agree, but for me, inclusion somehow gets through some of the weaknesses, as I see them, of the word diversity.
It is to recognize the difference and then create that experience that you're welcome here with your differences. It's when we hear things like, oh, a person's just a person, it doesn't matter what color they are, it doesn't matter what gender they are, that doesn't matter to me. This is kind of a blindness that really prevents us from being inclusive.
Yeah.
So we want to look at each person and understand their differences and connect with them on that personal level, so that they know, hey, I see your differences are welcome here. Especially as a manager, I want to be able to let you know, I see who you are. I welcome you to communicate with me what differences influence you at work, so that I can, as best I can, create a supportive environment for you. That's part of the work of inclusion. I think it follows along with get to know your people, love your people, get to know them, understand what makes them tick, and let them know what makes you tick. So the other side of that is for a leader to recognize their differences, to recognize their privileges, whether it's around gender or race. You have a privilege, and the way that we want to utilize our privilege is to help people who've been marginalized into the center, and from a place of humility that, hey, we want to build this as a community of people that we're working together. And yes, we have rich diversity. So that's, I think, part of the work that's up for us is how well we're actually exhibiting and those behaviors are coming from an authentic place. What you were talking about earlier is that kind of performative diversity or performative inclusion, where you have the little bumper sticker and that's it. So the work now is to really look at our behaviors, our actions, and what are we doing to actually enhance diversity, to bring diversity into our organization, to proactively engage people so that we know what their differences are and that we actively bring them in through our conversations, through the way that we treat them. And there's a spectrum of differences to take into account, whether it's their gender, their race. A lot of people have hidden disabilities.
Yeah, that you
that
can't see. That's right.
you can't see,
Yeah.
but it does affect them.
Yeah.
So it really is creating that safety that you're talking about for people to connect with you and let you know what are the challenges, what are the differences that they experience that have them feel excluded, so that we can create a more inclusive environment.
Yeah. And I wonder, I said to you in the question, you know, that over the, say, the next 5 years, these changes never linear.
Right.
But do you see us going towards a positive direction, or are we tripping up a bit, and you know, progress isn't quite as great as we would hope? I mean, how do you see it?
Well, it's like this, you know, is it a moment or is it a movement? So if we're responding to something, like we saw a lot of people respond and wanting to do diversity training now to kind of, you know, that's the thing that we need to do now about this, but not really understanding what it actually meant. And one organization I worked with, I just told them, I said, if you want to take this on, this is not something that's a workshop.
Yes.
This is something that's
This is a
for
fundamental culture
years.
change.
Yeah, it's years. It's about your culture. It's for years. It's about things you're going to do that are difficult, that are challenging, that you probably at one point you're going to go, do I really want to do this? And it's asking ourselves, you know, there are three rationales really. There's the business rationale, which is it needs to make business sense for us to do this. And there's a lot of research around that, why diversity will enhance your bottom line. There is the ethical, which is the right thing to do. Like we just know this is the right thing to pursue. And then there's the personal. So where does all this intersect with you personally? And I need to have those trinity of rationales kind of vibrant within myself, so I can speak to them, so that I can talk about them. And especially the personal one, a lot of leaders forget that it's your own personal story that really helps this land for people as to why it's important and why we're doing this, why we're spending the time. This is not a nice to have. This is something that's essential and core to us.
Yeah. So Jim, it's been great really talking with you, and I really appreciate sort of hearing your views and your experience. To finish off with all your experience, what's your message to leaders today? Can you give our viewers and listeners 2 top tips or reflections on how to lead with integrity and purpose in 2022 and onwards?
Okay. Sure. I think first of all is to embrace reality, embrace your people, move towards, right? If you find yourself shying away from something, that's okay. Acknowledge that to yourself, that maybe you're just wanting to create a bubble of safety for yourself. But ultimately, leadership is about embracing what's going on around us, whether it's what's happening in the outside world and society, whether it's what's happening on our team or in our organization, to embrace that and be able to, as we talked about, let it register for you and be able to communicate authentically with your people, to have that authentic communication. That will always bring people home to themselves. And I think those are the 2 things: move towards and go for authentic communication.
It's I've got the tape somewhere from the old days of feel the fear and do it anyway.
Right. I heard on the radio, I think it was Sean Paul actually just said, fear, forget everything and run, or is it face everything and rise? So
Yes.
that's what it's about. That's what I think true courage is not having fear. It's like feeling it and moving forward with that experience.
Yeah. And that takes courage, actually.
It does.
As well as a sense of self-awareness to say, I notice what is happening. Because in that way, in that moment, you're not in reaction.
Right.
And it's that is such a powerful place to be, when you can actually notice what's going on, because then you can do something about it. It's very interesting. We've been having some conversations about addiction
Hmm.
And, I think it's certainly, I have heard a lot of people say, look, it's just a choice. You can
Hmm.
choose to inject the next dose or whatever it is, or you can choose not to. It's simple as that. But I think most of the people who say that have not actually been in that situation.
Exactly.
Because I think what they're finding more and more is it's not as simple as that, so that when people are addicted, they in that moment, when they inject or whatever it is, or go out and steal something in order to get the money to self-administer, in those moments they are so driven, and their brain is so wired that there is no choice.
Right.
And I think for me, that realization is a place to really honor that sense of powerlessness. And for me, it enables me to actually respect an awful lot more people in that situation, and want to help, if you like, or to create a space where they can feel safe and begin to experiment. Because, and it just, I don't know, I keep coming back to this thing about you can only make the choice if you have the awareness in order to make that choice.
Right. With NLP, I've helped a lot of people stop smoking. And it's really interesting because that mechanism of it being automatic, there's usually a negative feeling that they feel, and then the thought cigarette will help resolve that. And interesting thing is that they typically just see one cigarette in their mind, right? They never see all the cigarettes that they've ever smoked or will smoke in their lives. And so being able to understand that it's a complex neurological mechanism that's in place that creates that addictive behavior, and that it takes a lot of work to be able to rewire that so that they have a choice. One person that I worked with, she goes, I get at work and I get fuming mad. It was like an interest, and she goes out and has a cigarette.
Fuming mad.
Fuming mad. And so what she came up with as an alternate behavior, because that's what we want, is to go out and sip ice water through a straw. So it's cooling the fuming inside, and it's that experience of drawing something in. And that really helped her kind of change that habit of getting fuming mad and then going out and having a cigarette. It's really, to me, this is the type of conversations that are really fascinating to me to understand. It's what NLP allows you to see, is how this world gets put together.
And also the power of language. That's the bit of NLP that I always loved, was that there's so much in our language and the words that we choose, normally unconsciously, and yet the giveaways that are in there.
Right. I just have another quick story. A gentleman came to me because he was overeating. And so we kind of slowed things down. It's like, what's happening as you're eating? And he goes, oh, I can see my plate grows little legs and then it runs off. And so I have to eat all the food before it runs off. And as he looked at where did that come from, it was when he was a child. His parent would come and grab the plate before he was finished eating. And so he had to eat really fast. That took a lot of time to be able to understand that pattern and to be able to create something that was different. Like, take a bite, take your time, see how full you feel. There are lots of other ways. And so this, I think, to the point of that, making those changes is not just a choice. You have to make a choice that you want to work on this. And then that's the starting point.
It's fascinating stuff. So Jim, thank you. If people want to sort of learn more about you or get in contact with you, how do they do that?
They can go to my website, peal.com, peal.com, and that has all the different types of things that I work with. and they can also make a contact with me through that.
Super. All right, Jim.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Thank you,
been
Thom.
fantastic catching up with you again. And thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. My pleasure always, each and every time I get to work with you. So thank you, Thom.